Welcome back. Second episode of Maritime Salvage. Hope this episode gets out on time. I've been really under the weather. Let's step into the storage locker. I think we're gonna keep things pretty simple. Yeah, there it is. I picked up a Stryfe the other day for $5. Has a really gummy trigger. Doesn't work. I suspect the batteries are corroded. I'm gonna take this over to the workbench and we're gonna take this from a broken $5 Stryfe to maybe 150 FPS fun hitter, and we'll see what it takes to do that and how much it costs. So let's go. Let's get into this and see why this Stryfe is not working and see if we can salvage it. First thing we're going to do, I have a sneaky suspicion there are corroded batteries in here. Yeah, it just felt like there was from the weight. Oh, those are pretty bad. You don't want to store batteries look at that in your blaster. The good thing is we're probably not going to use this. We're going to tear all this out anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I am going to try to keep it really, really accessible. I am going to use some 3D printed parts when I do this mod. Now, extended battery covers for the Stryfe. You know what? You could make one, cut up some cheap thin cutting boards, get creative, or ask a friend with a 3D printer to help you out with a few parts. I kept that $4.99 sticker on there as a reminder of how much we have into this for materials. All right, no more talking. Time for an opening speed ramp. It's so nice when a blaster doesn't have any critical components on the other side of the shell. We are going to unscrew this and get rid of this whole cage. The trigger mechanism seemed kind of sticky, and I don't know why. It has a little lock in it that if you don't have a mag, well, we'll just take that out. Whoa. We're missing a spring there too. Or no, wait, are we missing a spring, or is this just in the wrong spot? I'm not a Stryfe expert here, as you can probably tell. Let's move that. Yeah, that's, you're supposed to be there. Oh, all these locks that I'm just not very familiar with. Okay. I usually leave some locks in, but I'll put that there. And you know what, just for my convenience, I'm going to move this whole assembly out of here. We are going to get rid of this jam door lock. Boy, this is all squee-honked here. Let's take that right out of there. Are you the same? These are not quite the same. All right, we'll keep you. Whoops, no we won't. We'll keep this with the trigger. We're gonna get rid of this. This is a little thermistor, and that can limit things. We're gonna tear all this out of here, actually. This whole front piece comes off. Put that over there. I might just start snipping because we're not gonna use this stuff anyway. Oh, I do want these screws probably. I have been keeping all of these because sometimes I do little projects with stock motors and flywheelers because they're cheap to experiment with. Wow, that's a complex little dart gate there. The Stryfe, who knew? I mean everybody but me. This out. We don't need this little board anymore. So this can just come right out. I'm gonna get rid of this lock down in here too. I want to be able to rev it. I don't want, there's so many locks in here. I don't want all of those. Wire channel. We will probably try to use that wire channel after. Snip that. Right there. Snip that. Let's get in and take a look in here. We're gonna just take this out. I don't like it. Ooh, a tiny spring. I do like to keep tiny springs. Garbage, garbage. Why can't I figure out how that was in there before? It was in there like that. Silly me. I'm actually going to screw that back in there. And that's just our mag release. That's all good. Let's get in here and take a look. Move that for now. All right. This switch needs to go. So here's where we get into some 3D printed parts. Now, you wouldn't have to use a 3D printed part for this. You could use a new micro switch. I will find one in a sec. You could use your new switch, do some cutting in either epoxy or glue in here, but I do have a little switch that I printed and I'm going to use that instead. So forgive me. I'm going to take these out for now too. We probably won't keep in the trigger lock unless you're revved. I like to do that with blasters I'm going to let kids use, but the way this works in the Stryfe, that just might be too tricky to do. People will just have to be taught to rev first. Here is a switch plate that we have. This is from Tinkercad, from Flywheel. This seems to fit in there nicely. I am going to make some marks so I know where to cut. And I'm going to use some snips. I could Dremel, but we're just going to cut down with some snips. We need to go down a little bit further. This is where a Dremel can be kind of handy, actually. Let's use a Dremel. Safety glasses on. Again, a Dremel is not required. I'm just doing it now because it's easier. Well, you're not quite flush. You're close though. Yeah, we need to go a little bit more so that micro switch will fit in there. We actually need to get rid of this too, which I didn't realize. That is pretty flat. I like to clean out any loose little bits here. So we have that there. We have, and there are versions of this that do not require screws. That might be something I should have used, but it's fine. That's gonna fit over here now still on the post, even with that in. I am gonna glue this into place. And through the magic of video, we will let that dry. Actually, while that's drying, I'm going to also glue this other little piece that I thought was interesting. This is just to make a bigger push area for the rev switch, just to make it less likely for it to miss that lever or button, which I like that idea. And we'll set this aside to dry as well. While all of our things are drying, I might switch over to wire up this new cage. This is from the Open Flywheel project, this cage. It is a 42 millimeter crush. So I'm gonna use Kraken's Worker Smooths, hopefully get that right around Stryfe X performance of 150 or so. New day. We have our switch plate is mounted in very well. This sits up, lines up pretty well with the holes here. There we go. I might have to put a little bend in this switch arm here, but that's not a big deal. That's gonna work great. And we have our little fill-in piece in here, which I like the idea of. Before we get into that bit of wiring, I'm actually going to put together the cage. I'm going to flip it over. I'll move this stuff back. All right, so I want my darts to go that way when the cage is flipped over. All right, I had to double check some things because I always worry about getting this backwards. I have my motors in like so. This red dot at the top, which is actually the bottom, is facing the back of the blaster, and this red dot is facing forward. Let's put in some motor screws and then let's wire this up. I use a little bit of blue thread locker. I use the end of a bit because I don't have anything to fit it, which is embarrassing even to show. That's definitely a little gap in the old toolbox here. It is very, very important that these motors are in straight. This one is in crooked. This one is fine. I realized why I was having some trouble. There's like a little strand of filament inside of the hole where the motor goes. But now this one is crooked. So I'm taking this back out. We're gonna look in here, make sure there's no little strands of filament. Put this back in. It might be that this is too tight. That one's in. And this one's also in. And it's straight. This one's rock solid. This one's loose. I might have to do the same thing to this side. All right, that was more of a job than it needed to be. I just had to take an X-Acto and kind of do a thin little scrape around these holes. These parts of the motor before the shaft, they need to be flush with the top. And they were not. They were stuck down. And that's why I was having a hard time getting things level and even. These are nice and tight now. I print cages with 3 walls, so this is solid. This would be all solid bits there. Now we're going to push on our flywheels, and we want to put a nice even pressure on those. I kind of go really, really slowly. We do want them seated all the way on. It's a little bit sticking out there. We'll go and we'll put the other ones on. Oof. It can be a little bit tricky to get them even. That looks pretty good though. Basically, I just check and make sure the same amount of shaft is kind of sticking out of the both of them. And also important, you don't want there to be any rub. Oh, like this one seems to have. This one does not. This one does. Where are you rubbing? Sometimes that will just kind of work itself out, but typically you don't want any rub. Could be it's pushed down far enough that the screws are scuffing on the top a little bit, which if that's the case, that will work itself out because I want them to be the same height. That fits right in there. I'm going to take out these screws. This is just the wire channel cover. Let's get that out of the way because we're going to want to figure out our wiring. So when I do solder this, I'm going to solder it that the wires are coming up and kind of going in this direction so that it's easier to run down in through here. So I'll kind of, it can make it easier on yourself if you kind of solder knowing what direction you're going, and that direction will be kind of right above the dart guide. I have an 18 gauge wire. I find that is so much easier to work with than 16. And I've never had a problem with 18, so here we are. So I'm going to, keeping in mind that this is actually the front, I'm going to stick this through this little terminal here as neatly as I can. When you're soldering, it's always handy to have the wire in the direction it's going to be going. I usually, well, we'll do this on the next part, I usually also try to have a little bit of extra, a little bit of slack in case I ever do anything wrong, which happens all the time. What I mean by that is I will tend to leave a little extra loop or a little extra kink with some extra room there. You could even, and it might even be easier if I did a loop. I think that's called a James Riedling service loop, but I don't need quite that much room. I'm just going to do this. One tip I picked up from Luke at Out of Darts is I do not cut the wire. I just keep that intact where I can. I'm just using an X-Acto to kind of spread these wires because I will probably tuck this over the terminal. This would be easier if this X-Acto had a tip on it. My tools are not in their best repair. And remembering that we want to eventually bring this down around like this. I'm not using a brush. I have terrible, terrible soldering habits. So now we have enough here, we can come around. So the black, a semi-automatic is really simple. Your negative spans the 2 motors and then it goes back to a plug, either an XT60 or an XT30, and your positive goes along the other 2 terminals. Your motors are kind of flipped opposite in a mirror image so that your red positive dot is opposite on the sides. But all your red does is your red goes from here into the switch, and you can see a little wiring diagram on the back. So basically you want your red wire to go into the common and to go into the normally open. And then what happens when this gets clicked, it closes that circuit And it's just as if the red wire was also going right to your XT60 plug or your battery. So a semi-auto circuit is really simple. You're just using this to close the loop. Maybe don't learn to solder from me. And you really should keep your wires from kind of, you don't want globs of solder on the cans of the motor. I've never had an issue, but you certainly can. It's a miracle some of my early projects didn't just short out. There we go, that's on the terminal. I do almost like a little DNA helix here, like this. And I'm going to cut this one and also loop it around like that. So probably around here. What are we doing here? I was gonna say maybe we'll strip some of that back. We'll just peel it a bit. Oh yeah, whoops. Whoops. So much for keeping that intact. I kind of got my strippers caught and tore that wire a bit. But oh well, we're gonna solder it anyway, so it'll be fine. We're gonna circle right around here. I think we'll go around that post because we don't want this to get in the way of the dart. Oh boy, I really made a mess of snipping that. But a little bit of solder will cover all of my mistakes. All sins will be hidden. Like I never did anything wrong. Boop, boop. That should be just fine. Let's do a little test. You might notice I haven't cut these yet. I'm still figuring out the lengths. When I can, I just kind of don't cut those wires until I have to. Let's bring these in here. We can actually, with what we did, we can bring those down to the wire channel. Now I don't think, yeah, it might actually. I was gonna say I don't know that the channel guide will fit, but I think the channel guide actually may fit. So that's kind of cool. The black wire, we're gonna come along here, and we want enough that I always like to have enough that when we put the battery door on, this one we'll probably use an extended one, we can have a little bit of loop. I would rather waste a little bit of wire than find myself short. So I'm going to snip that right about there, which is, I mean, so long. That's gonna go through here, and we're gonna have lots and lots of plug. And now for this one, we run this up along here, and this needs to go down through here. All these generous channels, which is awesome. That channel I might make a little bigger, but then we're going down to this switch, and we're gonna cut probably, again, I never want to be too short. And where's the best place to run this back through? It's gonna be pretty tight in here. I guess we can, yeah, we can get them both back there. So I'm gonna have this one go down from the flywheels to the normally open. So we'll say like right here. And then we'll kind of loop it onto this, and that'll work great. We have our little diagram here. Again, normally open. So that means if the trigger is not clicked, it will not rev. If you wanted this motor to stop when it's clicked, you would go to normally closed, which you'd be making a closed circuit, and then that would break it, which can be really cool for two-stage trigger builds. Loop this back. I like to get all of it through there if I can. I think we might have actually got it all through. Awesome. So what we'll do here, I guess we'll just solder that on like so. Bring my helping hands in just to hold on to that. Flux on here. Way too much. I'm sure you've seen a theme. want that to flux onto the flow onto this terminal here. Oh yeah, we got it. Now I could have, I kind of wish I had have, I could have put some shrink on and then covered this terminal with the finished connection with some shrink. I do that sometimes, but I didn't this time. So, yep, that still fits. Look at that. So then we're going to put our next wire that's going to eventually complete the circuit on it here. The direction of this will be going already up like that. It just makes it easier. We don't have wires kind of competing for space, or we're not putting undue stress onto them either, which I don't like to do. Making sure I'm doing this where you guys can see it. I think I am, because that would suck. All right. I usually will, on the wire that's on the other side, I'll just kind of like bend it back towards the tab, just so that the wires are not actually touching the switch. And yep, good flux there. Do a little test here. This is really, really great. Everything is fitting excellently. Let's say this wire is going through here, then right around here we'll make this about the same length. I know everyone likes XT60s. I really like XT30s. I have a lot of small batteries, so I do a lot of XT30 builds. This is going to be awesome. So these are going to fit here. So I'm just going to finish all this wiring so I can do a bit of a test. But then we are going to, is that too long maybe? No, because I can always loop it back here if I need to. I'd rather have it a bit too long than too short. That's for, we could even, yeah, loop those around there. And I'll do my negative first. Negative is always the pointier side. Pointy side's always negative. There we go. Flip this over. Always put a bit of shrink on first. You do want to put shrink on your battery terminals. That is for sure. And you want that to kind of flux in, flowing into the XT6 or XT30 in this case. And then after, you want to give it a good tug and make sure all is good. All is good. So I'm going to move these up. I would usually put another piece of shrink over the connector, but I don't have any of the right size. I need to, I ordered some new stuff, but it was way too big. I ordered 1/2 inch, and I think I need 3/8 of an inch. Trusty lighter. A heat gun would work, but my heat gun's so big. So a lot of times I just do that. Something you should always do, when I make this a video, I'll make a note to do it. You should always, always, always check your blaster shooting the right way before you solder on that XT60. Yeah, and never test with a LiPo, which is what I'm doing right now. But don't do that. We are firing the right way. Yeah, I think that rubbing, that rubbing worked itself out. It was probably just that motor screw just wasn't tightened down as far down as it could have gone. I was recording some audio with no microphone on. So we have used some 14mm bolts M3, and we've secured this switch onto our plate, which is perfect. I was talking a little bit about, I bent this arm out towards the trigger. I bent it out towards the trigger so the response time would be good. And then I bent this back like I did because I didn't want it to catch on this ledge when I put this cover back on, like so. And let's put our screw back in here. This just keeps everything all tidy. You could glue this switch in with a dab of super glue or use a bunch of hot glue. You can't use too much super glue because it can ruin a switch, but you could use a little bit in the middle of the base. But these are cheap and they work really well. If you're doing a bunch of modding, it's good to get some M3 bolts in different sizes. Now we're going to see if we can put this wire channel back in and cover everything up. Let's see how we do. This is definitely a thicker gauge wire, so it might not, this channel might not work as it is. Hey, that's not bad. You know what? That's keeping everything in place anyway. We could use a little bit of hot glue instead, but I think that'll work nicely. All right, this is a me thing. I worry about leaving edges here. I'm gonna make a more gentle place for those wires to come up. Or I've made something even sharper. Well, I don't think so though. Yeah, I think that's less pressure on the wires here. Perfect. Now we are going to have to get those old bits out of here and get any metal out of there. Oh, I might put in the screws here for the flywheel cage. There we go. So we need to get these old bad terminals out. That one came right out. There we go. I like to get all that metal junk out of there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a Dremel and I'm going to put a little hole back here where our XT30 can come out. And we're going to cut out all of this stuff to make our battery tray bigger. We'll actually be able to fit a small 2S LiPo with the stock door. And I'm going to have a printed door for a bigger LiPo. Although this, yeah, that one's close, but it won't quite fit. You can't fit much into a 4AA tray. We can just kind of rip and tear for a lot of this. And then we can Dremel it down after. Now you could use snips for a lot of this. Well, I kind of went through there. I don't want to go through there for my XT30 because, well, we have our pusher and all of our stuff here, so we got to be a little bit careful where we go through. We don't want to be underneath that. So, whoopsie to me, going over that a little bit. The easiest place would be to come in through the top here, actually. I'm going to cut a channel here. Oh, be careful not to cut into my wires. Well, actually, I'm not going to cut down in. I'm just make that a little smoother for going across here. Let's go in through the top. You could certainly do it cleaner than I just did it. So we are going to want to do some hot gluing. This is where I am just going to do a little bit of a fit. So I just want to make sure nothing is impeding this. That all looks pretty good. And it is always a good idea to keep everything locked into place with some hot glue. I just pour some in, it will flow over the wires and dry, and make sure it's out of the way. As long as you use kind of any little nooks and crannies like that, you should be completely fine. And we'll just let that dry. Put some of our other parts in here while everything is drying. That way we can also make sure that nothing's interfering, which it's not. Everything's well out of the way. And this is it. We're ready to close this back up. I'm gonna let that glue dry. Here's a little thing I always forget. It's that little end strike nub. When you open them up, these like to fly out. There we go. And we want both of these in there. Good looking, simple Stryfe mod. There we go. I use that bigger one. I can't remember if it's the right one, but it fits. So we may explore and feature making this a short dart blaster in a part 2, but for now, we are going to leave this as a sleeper Super Stryfe here. I'm even going to leave on the Value Village price tag. That closes up so easy. It's unusual to not have to do any shell cutting on the other side. And we should always use a voltage alarm. I'm just doing a quick little test here. I do love that this battery will mostly fit in. We're gonna have to Dremel these ridges off. If we do that, we can actually use this one with our stock door, which is kind of cool. So this right now is running on 2S. I'm just printing our battery tray for 3S, but pretty cool to have an option if you want a super sleeper. I just did some 2S testing with our small battery that fits in, and we were getting 120s up to 129, which is perfect for 2S. Let's try 3S with everything all together while we're waiting. On long darts with 3S, we are getting 145 to 155, so super happy with that. That's with a 42 crush. We could go a bit higher than that and up it a bit more, but then it starts to get into easier to jam territory, I've found. So there you have it. We took our $5 Stryfe and now it is a 150 FPS Stryfe. Now a mod like this is definitely not the cheapest. You need a couple $8 hobby motors. You need an $8 pair of flywheels. You need a new micro switch, some wire, the tools, lipos potentially. Flywheel modding is a bit more expensive. It happens to be my favorite, so that's why I jumped into this one. I'm gonna have a link down below to some kits that you can get to at least get everything that you would need in order to do a mod like this. I would fire this more and show you more, but this isn't actually the one I just modded. This is unmodded. I'm going to actually mod this one, I think, for short darts next, and I'll do a follow-up video on that. But I've actually already sold the Stryfe that I modded. It's on its way to Singapore. And I hope you enjoyed watching that. I hope it helps if you're looking to do your own initial mods. There are cheaper motors you could use out there as well, and you would still get pretty decent performance. And I especially love those sleeper builds that look like a stock Nerf blaster and then just fire darts like crazy. We'll see you on the next episode of Maritime Salvage. We'll probably make that next episode, whatever we do, a little bit more budget conscious maybe. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time. I almost forgot. Here's a couple of photos of a couple battery door options that you might use depending on the size of your lipo. I'll have some links to the Thingiverse files for those down below as well.